The city lights flickered like 1,000 tiny stars, spilling golden reflections across the balcony floor. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of blooming jasmine from the neighboring terrace. She leaned against the railing, feeling the cool metal press into her palms, her gaze drifting over the distant skyline, yet somehow not really seeing it. Her mind was elsewhere, focused on the anticipation that had been building all evening. He appeared behind her without a sound, the soft click of the door barely noticeable over the muted hum of the city below. She didn't turn immediately, savoring the moment just before their eyes met. He was close, closer than she expected, and the tension that had been simmering between them seemed to pulse in the space between their bodies. "You look incredible," he murmured, his voice low and husky, sending a shiver down her spine. She finally turned, letting her gaze meet his, and for a moment, the bustling world beyond the balcony disappeared. There was only the two of them, suspended in that fragile bubble of intimacy. Her heart raced as he stepped nearer, each movement deliberate, slow, as though he were drawing out the moment, savoring the closeness. The scent of his cologne rich, warm, with a hint of something earthy wrapped around her, and she felt a heat rising that had little to do with the summer air. "I can't stop thinking about you," he confessed, a trace of vulnerability hidden behind his confident demeanor. It made her chest tighten, the words striking a chord she hadn't expected. She wanted to respond, to reach out, but the world seemed to have condensed into the subtle distance between them, the teasing inches that separated their lips, their hands, their bodies. Her fingers twitched, craving contact, yet she hesitated, letting the tension grow, letting the desire linger in the charged silence. Then he leaned in slightly, just enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from him, and her resolve began to falter. She wanted this. She needed this. And the thought sent a delicious thrill through her veins. "May I?" he asked, nodding toward her cheek, the question both tentative and demanding at once. She swallowed hard, her pulse pounding in her ears, and nodded. His hand brushed against her skin, feather-light at first, sending sparks dancing through her entire body. Her breath hitched, and he smiled softly, as if he understood the storm he had just unleashed within her. Their movements became a slow dance of discovery. His fingers traced the line of her jaw, down her neck, and her body responded in kind, leaning into him, yearning for more than mere touch. The night around them seemed to hold its breath, the city lights casting long shadows across the balcony, illuminating the curves and edges of their entangled silhouettes. She closed her eyes as his lips hovered near hers, teasing, warm, a promise of everything yet to come. Every nerve in her body felt heightened, electric. She felt alive in a way that had nothing to do with the city below and everything to do with the closeness, the intimacy, the unspoken words hanging between them. Then, finally, he kissed her, not hurried, not desperate, but slow, deliberate, exploring the contours of her lips as if memorizing them. Her hands rose to his shoulders, gripping lightly, trembling, yet not wanting to pull away. The taste of him, the softness of his lips, the subtle pressure of his body against hers, it was intoxicating. Her mind went blank, surrendering entirely to the moment, the night, the ache that had been building for weeks finally finding release in this single, exquisite connection. When they finally pulled apart, just slightly, her forehead resting against his chest, the world returned, but it felt different now, charged, alive. The air was thick with longing, the kind that lingered even when lips were no longer pressed together. She knew this night on the balcony was only the beginning, a first spark in a fire that promised to burn long and bright. And as the city continued to glow beneath them, she realized she didn't want the moment to end, not now, not ever. The night seemed to wrap around them like a velvet cloak, cocooning the balcony in secrecy. Even the distant hum of traffic felt muted, as if the world itself had leaned back to give them privacy. She stayed close to him, their bodies brushing with every subtle movement, a tantalizing friction that made her heart pound harder. He leaned against the railing now, one hand pressing lightly against the cold metal, the other trailing a gentle path along her arm. Her skin tingled wherever he touched, a delicious warmth spreading from the small contact points, making her senses heighten with every glance, every sigh. She could feel the heat emanating from him, and it was magnetic, pulling her closer without a word. "Tell me," he whispered, his lips brushing her ear, "do you ever think about us like this?" His voice was low, intimate, carrying a weight that made her shiver involuntarily. Her fingers twined with his as she hesitated, caught between shyness and the unrestrained desire building inside her. "Every day," she admitted softly, her voice trembling. "Even when I try not to." He smiled, a slow, knowing curve of lips that sent a rush of anticipation through her. "Good," he said, almost like a vow. "Because I haven't stopped either. Not for a second." The words hung in the air, heavy and electric, as he moved just slightly closer. She could feel the warmth of his chest against her cheek, and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat synced eerily with hers. It was as if the universe had shifted, collapsing everything else into this singular, perfect moment. Her hand slid up to his neck, tracing the line of his jaw with trembling fingers. He tilted his head slightly, giving her better access, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. The anticipation was almost unbearable, a delicious ache that built with each heartbeat. He took her hand from his neck, placing it over his chest, right above his heart. "Feel that," he murmured. "That's all for you." The honesty in his words, the vulnerability beneath the confident exterior, made her chest tighten with longing. She pressed her palm harder against him, letting the warmth flow between them, her body responding instinctively. Their lips met again, this time with more urgency, a slow, simmering fire that built with each second. His hands moved down her back, pulling her slightly closer, and she felt the smooth fabric of his shirt against her skin, the subtle friction sending sparks through her nerves. Every inch of contact seemed magnified, every glance, every whispered word laden with a promise of more. She broke the kiss briefly, her forehead resting against his chest as they both tried to catch their breath. The city below twinkled, oblivious to the storm of emotion and desire unfolding above it. Her fingers grazed the line of his spine, and he shivered slightly at the touch, drawing her closer with a quiet growl that made her pulse race. "I've imagined this," he confessed, voice rough, "all the times we were apart, all the times I thought of you. And now it's real." Her lips curved into a small, shy smile as she traced circles over his chest, feeling the taut muscles beneath his skin. "I've imagined it too," she whispered, her words barely audible over the night breeze. Every stolen glance, every touch that didn't happen, it all led to this. A playful tension sparked between them as he leaned in to nuzzle her neck, teasing her with gentle, deliberate kisses. She gasped, tilting her head to give him better access, letting the sensation wash over her in waves. Every nerve in her body felt alive, every breath a shared secret, every heartbeat a drum beat to the rhythm of desire growing between them. Time seemed to slow, stretching the night into an endless moment of connection. Her hands roamed the line of his shoulders, the curve of his arms, memorizing the shape of him as if she were committing him to memory. He returned the favor, letting his touch linger along her waist, the small of her back, teasing, coaxing, promising more without yet delivering it fully. And in that charged silence, with the city sparkling below and the stars overhead, she realized something profound: this was only the beginning. The balcony was no longer just a space between the indoors and outdoors, it had become a threshold between restraint and surrender, a place where every longing could finally take form. Her lips met his once more, a kiss that was part question, part demand, all-consuming. The heat between them grew, a slow, delicious burn that promised nights like this, full of whispered confessions, stolen touches, and relentless desire. And for the first time, she didn't want to stop. The night air seemed to pulse around them, thick with warmth and anticipation. She could feel the subtle tremor in his hands as they lingered over her back, and it mirrored her own quivering desire. Every glance they exchanged carried a promise, every touch a spark that ignited something deeper, something unspoken between them. He took a step back, just enough to study her, letting his eyes trace the curve of her shoulders, the line of her neck, the gentle tilt of her head. She shivered under his gaze, feeling exposed yet safe, vulnerable yet electrified. There was something about the way he looked at her that stripped away pretense, that laid bare the longing and need that had been simmering for weeks. "You're beautiful," he murmured, his voice barely more than a whisper, yet it struck her like a flame. "More than I imagined. More than I thought I could ever desire." Her lips curved into a small, tentative smile. "I've wanted this too," she admitted, her voice soft, trembling. "More than I can explain." He closed the distance again, pressing his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling in the cool night air. The space between them seemed impossibly small and yet stretched with tension, as if the world had narrowed to this single point of shared heat. She felt his hand slide down, brushing along her arm, lingering just long enough to send waves of anticipation rolling through her. Their lips met again, slow at first, savoring the softness, the taste, the intimacy. Then the kiss deepened, hungry and unrestrained, as if they were both trying to convey all the words and feelings they hadn't spoken. Her hands moved up into his hair, tugging gently, and he responded by pulling her closer, the warmth of his body pressing against hers, grounding her in the exquisite reality of the moment. She leaned into him, letting the night wrap around them, feeling the electric charge that passed with every subtle contact. His hands roamed carefully but deliberately, exploring her sides, her waist, tracing the contours of her body with a reverence that made her ache. The heat between them was palpable, growing heavier with each heartbeat, each whispered breath. "You make it impossible to think straight," he admitted, his lips brushing her temple. "Impossible not to want," his words trailed off, lost in a moan of desire that she felt reverberate through her own chest. Her fingers traced down the line of his back, finding the tension in his muscles, the steady thrum of life beneath her touch. She pressed herself against him instinctively, letting the friction of their bodies speak for what words could not. Every brush of skin sent sparks racing through her, each gentle caress a reminder of the raw, undeniable pull between them. The balcony felt smaller now, a confined stage for their passion, a private world suspended above the city. Lights twinkled below, distant and oblivious, while above them, the stars bore silent witness to the growing intensity of their desire. She could feel herself melting into him, losing all sense of control, all sense of time, surrendering to the delicious tension that had been building since the moment they first stepped onto the balcony. He tilted her chin gently, forcing her eyes to meet his again. "Do you know what I want?" His gaze was molten, almost feral, and she nodded slowly, unable to speak. Words were unnecessary, the longing in her eyes, the tremor in her lips, the heat radiating from her body said everything. His hand moved to her face, cradling it as if it were fragile glass, and he kissed her again, long and slow, a mixture of tenderness and need that left her breathless. She pressed closer, wrapping her arms around his neck, feeling the tension and the fire of desire entwined in a single, unbroken current. Every sense was heightened: the soft whisper of the night breeze, the scent of jasmine mingling with him, the sound of their mingled breaths, the feel of skin against skin, warm, electric, insistent. She could feel the steady rise and fall of his chest, the steady beat of his heart, and it synchronized with her own, two bodies moving in an intimate rhythm of anticipation and desire. He pulled back just slightly, resting his forehead against hers, his breath hot and shallow. This is only the beginning," he whispered. And she knew he was right. The night had opened a door, one that neither of them would want to close, a threshold into something deeper, more consuming, more irresistible than either had imagined. The balcony no longer felt like a simple overlook of the city. It had become a sanctuary, a crucible for desire, a place where the tension that had been simmering between them for weeks could finally, intoxicatingly, come alive. And as she pressed herself closer to him, letting her lips brush his one last time before the next surge of need, she realized that nothing, not the night, not the stars, not the city below, mattered except the heat, the longing, the undeniable passion that was just beginning to blaze. The night seemed to stretch infinitely around them, the city below a blur of distant lights, irrelevant compared to the warmth pressing between them. Her hands moved over his chest, memorizing the rise and fall of each breath, the taut strength of his muscles, the steady pulse that matched the quickened rhythm of her own heart. Every glance, every touch, every whispered word felt magnified in the quiet intimacy of the balcony. He leaned closer, letting his lips brush along her neck, just beneath her ear, and she shivered at the sensation. The softness of his lips, the deliberate, teasing warmth, sent sparks cascading down her spine, igniting a fire that had been smoldering since their first touch. Her fingers threaded into his hair, tugging slightly, craving the closeness that had become irresistible. "I can't get enough of you," he murmured, his voice rough and low. "Not just tonight, not ever." The sincerity in his words made her chest tighten, a delicious ache that mingled with the heat rising in her core. She pressed herself against him instinctively, letting the friction between their bodies speak what words could not. Their lips met again, slow and searching, exploring, as if they were learning each other all over again. Every kiss carried a promise, every brush of skin a spark of need that left them both breathless. She felt him press against her, his body warm and insistent, and a tremor ran through her at the contact, subtle at first but quickly building into something she could no longer contain. He pulled back slightly, resting his forehead against hers, and she could see the desire burning in his eyes. "You have no idea what you do to me," he whispered, his thumb tracing soft, lazy circles on her cheek. She smiled, a mixture of shyness and surrender, and leaned into his touch, feeling the intensity of the connection between them deepen. The night air carried the faint scent of jasmine, but all she could focus on was him, the way his gaze held her, the subtle brush of his lips against her skin, the heat radiating from his body that made her ache for more. Her fingers roamed his back, tracing the contours of his shoulders, feeling the tension that lingered there, the strength that made her heart race. He captured her lips again, this time with a hunger that made her gasp. She responded immediately, wrapping her arms around him, pressing herself closer, letting every nerve in her body come alive with the exquisite intensity of their shared desire. Each kiss, each touch, seemed to draw them deeper into a world that existed solely for the two of them, a sanctuary suspended above the city, safe from prying eyes, safe from hesitation. Her lips broke from his for a brief moment, and she whispered, I've wanted this for so long. The words trembled out of her, heavy with longing, with anticipation, with the admission of every secret thought she had kept locked inside. He smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I know, he said, his voice a gentle caress. I've felt it too. Every time I saw you, every time I thought of you, it was this moment waiting to happen. Their bodies moved together almost instinctively, pressed close, swaying slightly as if the balcony itself had become a private dance floor. His hands roamed with reverence and desire, tracing her waist, her sides, the gentle curve of her back. She responded in kind, letting her hands explore, memorizing, learning, claiming. The tension between them built with every second, a delicious, irresistible pull that neither could resist. He leaned in to kiss her again, and she felt herself melting into him completely. Time seemed to suspend, the world outside forgotten, as every nerve, every breath, every heartbeat became part of a single, overwhelming sensation. The heat of the night, the closeness of their bodies, the raw, unspoken need that hung between them, it was intoxicating. For a long moment, they simply held each other, lips brushing, hands roaming, hearts pounding in perfect synchrony. The balcony had become their world, a small, suspended paradise where nothing else mattered except the electricity crackling between them. And in that suspended night, as the stars twinkled silently above, she realized with a shiver that this was more than desire. It was connection, intensity, intimacy, the kind that lingered long after kisses ended, the kind that left a mark on the soul as well as the body. The city below continued to glow, oblivious to the fire they had ignited above it, but up here, on the balcony, time had bent to their will, giving them a moment that would stretch, remembered forever, as the first night when longing and passion finally met. The city below continued its indifferent hum, lights twinkling like distant stars, but all she could sense was him, his warmth, his scent, the gentle press of his body against hers. The balcony felt suspended in time, removed from the mundane world, a private stage for a slow, electric intimacy that neither of them wanted to end. He traced the curve of her neck with a fingertip, light as a whisper, and she shivered, letting her eyes close. The sensation sent ripples through her, a delicious thrill that made her ache for more. You feel incredible, he murmured, his lips hovering near her ear, brushing against her skin. She let out a soft breath, unable to form words, letting her body speak in place of speech. Her hands roamed over his chest and shoulders, memorizing every contour, every taut line of muscle, every subtle shift of weight as he moved against her. The warmth of his touch, the careful, deliberate attention, made her pulse race. She pressed herself closer, craving the friction, the electricity that ran like a current between them. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a kiss that was at once tender and insistent. She responded immediately, arching into him, her hands threading through his hair, tugging lightly, drawing him closer. Each kiss deepened the tension, each brush of skin against skin igniting the desire that had been simmering for weeks, now boiling over in the quiet night. You have no idea what you do to me, he whispered between kisses, his voice rough with longing. Her lips curved into a small, breathless smile as she pressed herself against him, feeling his heartbeat hammering in sync with her own. The intimacy of the moment, the closeness, the vulnerability, it was intoxicating, almost overwhelming in its intensity. The night air caressed their skin, cool against the heat that radiated from their bodies. Every nerve felt alive, every touch magnified, every glance loaded with silent promises. She traced the line of his jaw with her fingers, felt the subtle tremor in his muscles as desire built, coiling like a spring ready to release. He pulled back slightly, just enough to rest his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling in shallow, shared gasps. "I want this to last forever," he murmured, eyes dark with intensity, lips brushing hers in a teasing, lingering kiss. She nodded, unable to speak, the weight of her own longing leaving her silent but fully present. Her hands moved lower, exploring the curve of his back, feeling the taut strength beneath his shirt. He responded in kind, letting his hands travel along her waist, her sides, gentle yet commanding, coaxing her closer with every motion. The tension between them was electric, a slow, delicious burn that built with every second, every brush of skin, every whispered word. The balcony had become a world unto itself, a private sanctuary suspended above the city. Time had no meaning here, there were only the tiny sparks of contact, the shared breaths, the steady, inexorable pull of desire. She could feel herself melting into him, surrendering completely to the intensity of the moment, letting every ounce of restraint dissolve in the heat of their connection. He tilted her chin, capturing her lips once more, and she responded with a fervor that surprised even her. Every kiss, every brush of lips, every press of bodies was a declaration, a confession, an embrace of the unspoken desires they had both harbored. She pressed closer, letting the friction of their bodies against each other speak the words she could not find. For a long moment, they simply held each other, swaying slightly as the balcony seemed to spin beneath them, though the world itself remained still. Each heartbeat, each gasp, each brush of lips carried the weight of weeks of longing, of anticipation, of unfulfilled desire finally meeting release. And as the night stretched on, as the stars glimmered above and the city hummed below, she realized something profound: this was no fleeting passion. It was a fire that would linger, a memory that would burn, a connection that would deepen with every stolen glance, every touch, every whispered word. On the balcony, suspended above the ordinary, their hearts beat together, their breaths mingled, their bodies entwined. And in that intimate, electric night, she knew that nothing, not distance, not hesitation, not fear could ever diminish the bond that had ignited here, in the quiet heat of a balcony under a city's gaze. The night deepened, draping the city below in a quiet, shimmering haze of lights. Up here, on the balcony, time felt suspended. Her body pressed against his, the warmth of his chest a comforting anchor against the cool night air. Every brush of his fingers across her skin sent shivers racing through her, and she arched toward him instinctively, needing the contact that had become both soothing and intoxicating. He leaned close, his lips grazing hers in a kiss that was at once tender and fervent, full of the promise of everything they had been holding back. She let her hands roam over him, memorizing the contours of his shoulders, the taut line of his back, the gentle strength that made her ache with desire. Each touch seemed to spark something new, a current of heat and longing that traveled from her fingertips to the tips of her toes. "I can't stop thinking about you," he murmured, his voice low and husky, vibrating against her lips as their kiss deepened. Her breath hitched, the words igniting a fire she had tried to contain, making her heart pound and her pulse race. She pressed herself closer, savoring the friction, the closeness, the undeniable pull between them. Her fingers tangled in his hair, tugging gently as he tilted his head, exploring her mouth with a slow, deliberate hunger. She gasped against him, lips parting as he kissed her more insistently, every motion charged with the unspoken need that had built between them. Their bodies moved together almost instinctively, swaying in a silent rhythm, a dance born of longing and desire. He broke the kiss briefly, resting his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling in shallow, synchronized gasps. The night was silent around them, save for the whisper of the breeze and the quiet hum of the city far below. She could feel the rapid beat of his heart beneath her fingers, a steady drum that matched her own, and it made her ache to feel him closer, to merge with him in a way that words could not convey. "Every time I see you," he whispered, his lips brushing her temple, "I feel this pull, this need that I can't control. And tonight, it's unbearable." She trembled at his words, letting herself be consumed by the sensation, letting herself lean fully into the warmth and the heat radiating from him. Her hands traced the line of his chest, sliding lower along his torso, feeling the steady thrum of life beneath her touch. He responded with soft groans, hands exploring her back, the curve of her waist, tracing the lines of her body with a reverence that made her ache all over. Each caress, each touch, each gentle press of lips against skin was a revelation, a confession, a surrender to the desire that had been simmering for weeks. She tilted her head, letting him capture her lips again in a kiss that was slow, intense, consuming. Her body responded instinctively, pressing against his, molding into him as if they were two halves finally reunited. Every nerve in her body seemed alive, attuned to his slightest movement, each brush of skin sending sparks cascading in waves of heat and longing. The balcony felt smaller, more intimate, a private sanctuary suspended above the city. The stars overhead were distant witnesses to the fire that had ignited between them, to the growing intensity that had become impossible to contain. She felt herself melting into him, losing herself in the exquisite tension, letting every touch, every sigh, every breath draw them deeper into a shared world of desire and connection. His lips moved along her neck again, teasing, brushing, igniting shivers that ran down her spine. She moaned softly, pressing closer, letting herself fully succumb to the sensations, the closeness, the heat that radiated between them. Time no longer existed, only the rhythm of their bodies, the shared gasps, the stolen kisses, and the electric friction that made the night feel infinite. Finally, he pulled back slightly, forehead resting against hers, and whispered, This is just the beginning." She smiled breathlessly, tracing circles on his chest with her fingertips, knowing he was right. The fire they had kindled tonight would not fade. It would grow, relentless and consuming, binding them together in ways neither had anticipated. On that balcony, suspended between the world below and the stars above, desire and intimacy had merged into something unforgettable. And she realized, with a shiver of anticipation, that the culmination of their passion was still to come. The night had grown quieter, the city lights below dimming slightly as midnight approached. Yet up here, on the balcony, the world was alive with a heat all their own. Their bodies pressed together, swaying slightly in the soft glow of distant streetlights, hearts racing, breaths mingling, the tension between them a living, electric force. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing over her cheekbones, eyes searching hers with a mixture of desire and tenderness that left her breathless. "I've waited for this," he murmured, voice low and rough, "for every touch, every look, every stolen moment that brought us here." She shivered at the words, feeling the weight of longing and anticipation dissolve into the intimacy of the present. Her hands traced the lines of his shoulders and back, memorizing every curve, every taut muscle, the solid warmth beneath her fingers. He responded by sliding his hands down her sides, gently urging her closer, pressing her against him until the friction between them sparked a delicious ache that seemed to pulse through her very core. They kissed again, slow and deliberate at first, tasting, exploring, teasing each other with the tantalizing promise of more. But soon the restraint melted away, and the kisses deepened, fervent and insistent, as if they were trying to convey every wordless thought and long-held desire through the press of lips and the brush of hands. She gasped into the kiss, letting her body respond to his, leaning into him, melting into the heat that flowed between them. His lips trailed down her neck, over her collarbone, lingering in all the places that made her shiver and ache with longing. She arched into him, letting the sensation wash over her in waves, the cool night air contrasting with the fire that surged through her. Her hands tangled in his hair, tugging lightly, guiding him closer, urging him to explore, to claim, to ignite the passion that had been building for weeks. "You're mine," he whispered against her skin, a statement and a plea all at once. She trembled, lips curving into a soft, breathless smile as her hands roamed his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heart beneath her fingers. "And you're mine," she replied, her voice barely audible, carried on the same shivering breath that had left her gasping against him. The balcony, once just a simple overlook, had become a world unto itself, a private stage where desire and intimacy played out without restraint. The stars overhead twinkled silently, distant witnesses to the heat and urgency that enveloped them. Every brush of skin, every press of lips, every whispered word fused together into a rhythm of need and fulfillment, each moment stretching longer and more electric than the last. He pulled back just enough to look at her fully, eyes dark with intensity, lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. "I've wanted this moment more than I can say," he admitted. "Every touch, every glance that didn't happen, it all led to this." She nodded, trembling with desire and anticipation, pressing closer again, letting the friction of their bodies speak what words could not. Their kisses became more urgent, more fervent, exploring and claiming, teasing and surrendering. Hands roamed with reverence and intent, tracing curves, memorizing shapes, igniting shivers that ran like fire through every nerve. She arched into him instinctively, letting the ache of anticipation give way to the satisfying release of shared passion. Finally, they paused, foreheads resting together, breaths mingling, hearts hammering in tandem. The intensity of the night had brought them to a place beyond words, beyond thought, where desire and intimacy merged into a single, unforgettable sensation. She traced circles on his chest, feeling the warmth beneath her fingertips, the steady pulse of life, and knew that this was only the beginning of something much larger, something unbreakable. He pressed a lingering kiss to her lips, soft yet insistent, a promise of everything that had passed and everything yet to come. She responded, melting against him, letting herself be consumed by the combination of heat, longing, and connection that had defined the night. As the city slept below, they held each other tightly, bodies entwined, hearts aligned, souls brushing in a closeness that transcended mere touch. The balcony had witnessed the culmination of weeks of longing, the release of a desire that had been simmering quietly, now ignited fully in a fire neither would forget. And in the quiet aftermath, as their breath slowed and the stars continued to shimmer above, she realized that passion had become more than physical. It had become intimacy, trust, connection, a promise that lingered even as the night edged toward dawn. They were no longer two separate souls merely brushing against each other, they were entwined, together in a fire that would burn far beyond the confines of this balcony, far beyond this unforgettable night. The city remained still and unaware, but up here, in the glow of the balcony lights and the shimmer of distant stars, they had discovered something timeless, desire transformed into connection, longing fulfilled, and passion made eternal.